as 2025 comes to a close and we kick in 2026, the season is not too far away. The Arizona Diamondbacks face a franchise-defining decision in regards to what they will do with three-time All-Star second baseman Ketel Marte. And that decision is whether or not they elect to keep him and build around him, or if they will trade him to solve their pitching needs and turn around and sign Alex Bregman to try and fill that hole in the lineup. We will talk about that, possible Ketel Marte trade headliners, interest in a Japanese free agent that signed with the Chicago White Sox, and kind of put an end to 2025, put a bow on 2025, the recap of what we have accomplished here at D-backs Under Review on this episode of the D-backs Under Review podcast. And welcome back into another episode of the D-backs Under Review podcast. I am your host, Mike McDermott, publisher of the D-backs Under Review newsletter, which you can find at dbacks_underreview.com. No hyphen after D, dbacks_underreview.com. And also here, if you want to support the podcast, make sure to subscribe and leave a like on the video. Your engagement means a lot here. We're growing as a podcast. When we started this podcast, this channel was only at 20 subscribers as we were relying on Arizona Fall League clips to kind of draw people in. Now we kind of have consistent uploaded content, which you can consume twice a week, every Monday and Friday. And if you want to get past the YouTube algorithm and when they're going to recommend a video or not, hitting that subscribe button increases the likelihood you'll find this video in a very timely fashion. And of course, as well, engagement also increases the likelihood that YouTube will push it to non-subscribers. So we look at the situation with Ketel Marte, and the Diamondbacks do have a decision to make on him sooner rather than later. Because the problem is, the Diamondbacks can't put their offseason on hold and let potential targets slip as they try to figure out what they're going to get for Marte. And that's kind of the main topic here. In the previous episode, I had talked about the Diamondbacks needing to shut down Ketel Marte trade rumors by pulling him off the market. And that is one decision they can make. Now, of course, the counter to that is, based on the reporting at the end of the season, there's a little bit of a, I guess you can say there's a little bit of frustration with Ketel Marte and the leeways he's taking on the team, where you talk about his him randomly requesting days off and shutting down when he doesn't get it. One example of him asking for a day off came at the end of the 2024 season as the Diamondbacks were reeling off a pretty ugly loss to the Brewers. In the next game, Ketel Marte was scratched from the lineup. That was a decision that he made, and it definitely didn't sit well in the Diamondbacks clubhouse. And if you know how that season ended, Diamondbacks were eliminated via tiebreaker. The first team, and the Mets were the second team in 2025, that happened. Diamondbacks were the first team to get eliminated by the new tiebreakers by Major League Baseball. We used to have a game 163 in that situation, although I imagine a three-way tie would have made things very difficult. Of course, the end of the 2024 season is certainly one that's not going to sit well for the Diamondbacks and their fan base. So moving into 2025, we had the situation with Marte and the unexplained absence after the All-Star game, and then him going to the Dominican Republic instead of flying back to Arizona with Corbin Carroll and Eugenio Suarez following the All-Star game. So you have in essence, Marte went AWOL during the All-Star break, and then his house got burglarized, his Arizona house got burglarized. So he stayed in the Dominican Republic over the weekend, doesn't show up till Sunday. And of course, if you're the Diamondbacks, you don't know what you're going to do. Marte's just not in the lineup. They don't know where he is. I don't know the situation with the burglary and all that. So that put the team in a tough spot. And if you're Torey Lovullo, you feel like a dunce when they finally did run into him at the end of the weekend. So Marte didn't play in that series against the Cardinals. And then about a month later, 3-4 weeks later, we got that report from the Arizona Republic from Nick Piecoro, in which some of Marte's teammates, I think there were a couple in there that were traded at the deadline. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm not going to sort anyone because I don't really think I know who said what, although you could kind of guess based on what was said, but that's not my job to figure out. But anyways, with the Marte situation, there is some frustration growing in the clubhouse that could lead to a possible trade. Maybe the Diamondbacks said, okay, well, 10-5 rights kick in. We may have a problem with a threat of trading him doesn't work because once the 10-5 rights kick in, and that's going to happen on April 5th next year, because that would be the 10th day of the 2026 Major League season. Marte reaches 10 years at that point. They can't trade him without his consent, which means they can't get rid of him if he is a clubhouse problem in 2026 or later. So if that's the motivation, then they got to go best offer here, and then they would, in that scenario, would turn around, sign Alex Bregman to play third base. You would move Jordan Lawler to second base, so the vacancy filled up there, although Tommy Troy is a candidate to take over long term as well if they wanted to move Lawler to another position, or the second base thing doesn't work out. But in that scenario, like I said, in a vacuum, you would rather have Ketel Marte's bat versus Alex Bregman. Marte is still a 30 home run threat if he gets 600 plate appearances. Alex Bregman, his 30 home run days are behind him. You're going to be lucky to get 25 home runs out of Bregman moving forward, especially since Chase Field will be the toughest left field he'll play from a home run standpoint. If you look at the Green Monster and the Crawford boxes, the Green Monster's 310 down the line. Of course, they have this giant wall. And then you look at Dyken Park, of course, named Minute Maid when he played there. You have the Crawford boxes, which is 315 down the line. And it doesn't have a giant wall, and the wall isn't much higher than the fences at Chase Field. Well, maybe twice as high, but it's not a giant obstacle to try and hit it over like it is at Fenway Park. So Chase Field's kind of the deepest dimensions for Bregman. I think that would certainly hurt him a little bit. They have to hit it 340 feet, 50 feet for a home run at Chase Field versus 330 at Fenway or Dyken Park. It's going to be weird saying Dyken Park versus Minute Maid. I will just say that as a random tangent. So there's an obvious downgrade when you go from Marte to Bregman in the lineup, and you're spending twice as much money on the CBT payroll, depending on how the numbers work for Alex Bregman. Because you're looking at a $26 to $30 million per year deal with Bregman, and we're assuming deferrals, so the average annual on raw dollars might be higher than $30 million. I'm not entirely sure. I think if Bregman gets a 5-year deal, it's going to be more than $30 million per season. If it's a 6-year deal, which I don't like the idea of a 6-year deal with Alex Bregman, that's a situation where the AAV gets lower, but you're looking at $160, $170 million deal there. It was kind of interesting. There was a story that came out on MLB Trade Rumors. The reporting on Bregman is Bregman turned down $171 million from the Tigers last offseason. But, and that deal included some deferred money, which lowers the average annual down there because future dollars can't be accounted for at the same value as current dollars. And that's also why Ketel Marte's current extension, the average annual on the CBT payroll, is almost $5 million less than the raw average annual, which is like $4.5 million less. I assume the Diamondbacks do sign Bregman, and of course, if you believe Dan Bickley, it's going to be a done deal. Although I am 100% sure that's not the case. But in the case of Bregman, you're going to have deferred money because I don't see the Diamondbacks dropping a $30+ million number on their CBT payroll for a guy who is not a clear all-star level player. And when I say not clear, it's like you're not sure if he's going to make it. He's kind of on that cusp. And it's a lot harder to justify that decision chasing a free agent you weren't necessarily linked to at the start, like you were last year with Corbin Burns, because it was easy to sign Burns because you never have enough starting pitching. Corbin Burns is, if you compare Corbin Burns' 2021 to 2024 track record, it holds up well against literally anybody else, even Zach Gallen. And Zach Gallen's probably the second best starter in the National League over that time period. And for guys that actually pitched all 4 seasons. And you can make a case for Mel Kelly being top 5. But, so the Burns situation is different because there's always a need for high-end starting pitching. Whereas the Diamondbacks, they could be in a situation where it's like, it may be cheaper for them to go with Marte at second base for less than $15 million per year on the CBT payroll, and Jordan Lawler is getting basically rookie minimum Although the downside is Jordan Lawler, you're not sure what you're going to get, and his defense doesn't necessarily profile well for third base. Ask Tyler Locklear about that. Tyler Locklear is going to be starting the season on the IL because Jordan Lawler got his first baseman killed with a bad throw. And that was in the Red Sox series. But anyways, that would be the scenario the Diamondbacks go to if they hold on to Ketel Marte. They would have to figure out the bullpen situation because the Diamondbacks can't go another year with a bad closer situation. It's not like at least 2025 you could blame injuries because most teams aren't going to survive losing their first, their second, and their third option at closer unless you're the Dodgers and you have a giant $350 million payroll, and then you pay $100 million plus in luxury tax payments as well on top of that. And the Diamondbacks don't have that. Their CBT payroll per 2026 is probably going to be in the $210 to $250 million range if we believe what Kendrick said in September. It's going to be less than the 220 figure that they had in July of 2025 before they did the trade deadline sell-off. So with that in mind, it's going to be difficult. I think it's going to be difficult to sign Bregman, even if the Diamondbacks were to find an offer for Ketel Marte. But I do think if they did move Marte, they would move quickly to sign Bregman, because I think there is interest for Bregman to come to Arizona because he does live in Arizona in the offseason. There is appeal to playing in Arizona once you start there. And when the Diamondbacks are a good baseball team, although that's a question, that's something that's not clear for 2026. The Diamondbacks are a sneaky favorite to land free agents that have specific needs, where you're talking about early 30s, starting a family, and lower taxes. That's kind of the appeal of signing with Arizona when they have a competitive club. And you have 3-star hitters between Perdomo, Marte, and Carroll on team-friendly extension. That's also what makes Arizona a very attractive destination. Of course, trading Marte in that situation does subtract from 1 star, although theoretically you would replace him with Bregman, which would be a plus. Let's just put plus 15 million hit on the CBT payroll. I assume it's going to be slightly backloaded, so the first year won't necessarily be as bad. That would be the situation Diamondbacks are in. I think it's a situation where they're choosing between Alex Bregman and Ketel Marte. If they get a deal for Ketel Marte, and we'll talk about that in the next segment, we're going to see them pull the trigger on Ketel Marte, and then I think they'll turn around and sign Alex Bregman to play third base. Jordan Lawler moves to second base, and then they'll figure it out from there. So moving on to our next topic, we talk at Ketel. So moving on to the next topic, Ketel Marte trade headliners. So the headliner the Diamondbacks would be looking for in a Marte deal would be to land two MLB pitchers, a starter and a reliever. Now, of course, the implied situation with a starter is someone that either slides in the rotation right now, or is someone that could be either the first or second pitcher coming up from AAA in case of an injury. And based on this current rotation, it's not a question of if, but when. You got Merrill Kelly's 37. Eduardo Rodriguez is 33 and injury prone. When was the last time Erod made 30 starts? I think when that happened, the last time Rodriguez made 30 starts, I was 25 years old. That was the 2018 season. I'm 32, by the way. So you got an injury-prone Rodriguez on top of an aging Merrill Kelly. You also have a very injury-prone pitcher in Michael Soroka, although he claims that he will be able to get more innings out of that arm in 2026. But I'm going to be skeptical until I see it. So you got 3 starters you kind of have to worry about. Nelson has thrown 150 innings in the last 2 seasons. Rodriguez did in 2025, although the quality innings weren't necessarily good. And then Brandon Pfaadt, despite the quality innings issue, he's given you 350 innings over the last 2 years, almost 360. So Pfaadt is someone who'll give you innings even if he sucks at giving up runs in the situation. So you're kind of looking at 700 to 750 innings as the likely projection. I think the Steamer projection's at 815. I don't buy it. So it's a situation where Diamondbacks trade Marte for a prospect. He would be someone that would have to slide into the number 6 starter chart ahead of Christian Mena, in my opinion. Someone that they would keep in Reno just to stay stretched out, and then once the first injury happens, boom, he's right in the rotation. And there's only a couple teams that can satisfy the starter plus reliever situation where they don't necessarily kill their contention window by making that trade. The two teams that come to mind for me are the Boston Red Sox and the Seattle Mariners, if the Diamondbacks want to trade Marte out of the National League. Those are the two teams you kind of have to pay attention to. So with Boston, you would target Garrett Whitlock. He's under control through the 2028 season, assuming you hit both options. And he's coming off a very strong 2025 season, in which he pitched a 2.25 ERA and a strikeout rate of 31%. As the primary setup man to Aroldis Chapman. You look at the save and hold numbers, he had 1 save and 24 holds. Ironically enough, Chapman has 4 holds. I wonder what happened there. But anyways, going back to the situation, the Red Sox, I believe the Red Sox will be willing to give up Whitlock to get Ketel Marte if you're looking at reliever. The first option for the Diamondbacks should be pretty affordable at $8.5 million. That's not one that breaks the bank, although the second option at $10.5 million for the 2028 season is definitely going to not be a no-brainer. Whitlock is entering his age 30 season, although he's a young 30. I don't know if his deal includes escalators in case he hits a certain threshold for innings or appearances. But I can assume that Whitlock is available for $19 million. A little under $19 million. So $8.25 million option for 2027, which I assume the Diamondbacks will exercise if they trade for him. And then $10.5 million for 2028. That's kind of risky. It's a $10 million decision with a $500,000 opt-out. 2028, I think that's a situation where the Diamondbacks are that's kind of on the fence. If he pitches well in 27, you probably make that move in 28. But, so Whitlock would be an option if the Diamondbacks were willing to hit the two club options. The other team that makes a lot of sense here is, as I mentioned, the Seattle Mariners, and with a Bryce Miller, Matt Brash deal as your pitching. Now, I can assume the Diamondbacks are not going to be able to pry Andres Munoz from the Mariners, despite the fact he is on the most team-friendly closer deal on this side of Emmanuel Clase getting indicted for illegal gambling activity. Or at least his connection to it. However, the problem with trading for Brash is not necessarily a guy you can count on for 60 innings in a given season. If you look at Brash's track, well, Brash does have a season of 70 innings. So maybe we can. So Matt Brash would be the pitcher the Diamondbacks come back with a big swing and miss arm. Brash's career strikeout rate is 31%. Last year was at 29%, but again, the strikeout, if you take the walk rate and subtract from the strikeout rate, it's still above 20, which is excellent. Starter or reliever. So Brash would be an option. He's got 8 career saves and 54 holds, so he would be the guy you would insert as the closer while you're waiting for Martinez and Puck to come back from elbow surgery. And then once they do, Brash would be your high leverage right-hand pitcher situation and the primary bridge to Martinez, along with Puck. That would be the situation the Diamondbacks would find themselves in, assuming they make that deal. So a Miller and Brash deal, if the Mariners are interested in Marte. Those are the two pitchers I would target. Now, of course, the issue with Brash, obviously, is he didn't pitch in 2024. After that 78 appearance run in 2023, in which you wonder why the Mariners did that. Of course, they also lost their closer that year. He went to the Diamondbacks. You might have heard of him. His name's Paul Sewald. And that was also the year that Munoz became the closer for the Mariners. Probably because that's probably why they traded him, because they felt comfortable doing so. So if the Diamondbacks, going back to the Mariners deal, Brash plus Miller would be your trade for Ketel Marte. And I think you would settle for nothing less. And in the case of Bryce Miller, you got 4 years of control of a starting pitcher, and then Brash gives you 3 years of a back-end reliever. Now, if you can get that type of deal, I think that if the Diamondbacks can get Miller plus Brash, I think a deal happens. And of course, those aren't the only two players, but they would be mostly prospects. I don't think we'd be getting any high ceiling prospects in that deal. You'd be relying on Miller and Brash. So those are the two teams that offer the best trade package for the Diamondbacks in terms of a starter plus back end guy. There are some teams in the National League that could offer that. You look at the Miami Marlins. Let's say that you go Edward Cabrera and Calvin Fauché. Although I don't know if you can get both a frontline starter with 3 years of control and a back-end bullpen reliever with 3 years of control. And Fauché doesn't have the same strikeout swing and miss as Brash, although he's a much more reliable arm in comparison. The downside to going after Fauché is he's already 30. 30 years old, so there's the possibility he's already peaked, and he's also got some concerns with the underlying metrics. You look at the xERA with Fauché is 438 at 425 FIP, 393 xFIP, and 0 F4 in 2025. So if you're the Diamondbacks, I don't think you go for that package. Unless you think Fauché will pitch better, and certainly his velocity wasn't impacted in 2025. He was still sitting at 96 miles an hour, which is, when we're looking at the Fangraphs thing, I'm not looking at StatCast. I prefer StatCast when I look at pitch data. It's sitting at 96 according to Fangraphs, and we're looking at four-seam fastball velocity. I would have liked to pick up Henriquez in the deal, but Henriquez is not pitching in 2026. He is down with elbow surgery. He's got the internal brace, no Tommy John. So, as a result of Henriquez getting injured, that's not an option. The Mets don't really have any long-term bullpen guys. So you're looking at that. The National League doesn't really have much to offer. I do see Cincinnati having the pitching depth to execute a trade, as well as the Milwaukee Brewers as a possibility. But if you're the Diamondbacks, do you really want to trade Ketel Marte in the National League, especially to a team you might have to deal with in the National League race? Now, of course, they overpay. You'll take that situation any day of the week. But short of a complete overpay, I don't see this working out. And of course, when I look at an overpay with the Cincinnati Reds, you're talking Andrew Abbott as your starting pitcher and Connor Phillips as your reliever. Of course, Diamondbacks might not be. Diamondbacks might not necessarily want Connor. Connor Phillips doesn't have the track record of a back end guy. And of course, he's a starter that became a reliever. He's a starter that converted to reliever in the 2025 season because they simply ran out spots for him. But you're talking about a guy with a strikeout rate above 30%, possibly to add to your bullpen. And he's a guy that could filter down towards the back end if you wanted to put him on a reliever track. And we'll look at his AAA numbers as well. So, you look at Phillips' AAA numbers. He was exclusively a reliever in 2025. He did not start a game in the minor leagues. So you look at 34 minor league games plus 21 in the major leagues. But I do think if you wanted to make an upside play for a reliever, not necessarily a proven track record guy, that's certainly a guy you could target. But I don't like the idea of trading Marte to the Cincinnati Reds. They already got a playoff spot last year. Don't make it easier for them. And for the record, I don't like the idea of trading Ketel Marte for Hunter Green either, even though that seems to be everyone's favorite Ketel Marte trade proposal. Don't trade for a starter that hasn't thrown 30 starts in the season if you're trading an all-star hitter. Even if Hunter Green, if he were to be healthy and give you 26 starts, is a borderline 6-WAR pitcher. I don't think you can really count on him anchoring your rotation all season long. That's kind of my little gripe with Green. So yeah, Cincinnati has no arms, but I don't like the idea of trading to the Reds. The Mets have starting pitching depth in their minor league system, but I don't like the idea of trading to the Mets to make things harder for the Diamondbacks to make the postseason. So like I said, the Diamondbacks do trade Ketel Marte. I think it's going to be to the American League. And with the Boston Red Sox, despite what Bob Nightingale reported on Boston being out on Ketel Marte, I don't buy it that much anymore because they still have the assets to make a trade happen. Although they don't have that controllable back-end arm necessarily, unless the Diamondbacks are willing to commit to exercising the 2027-2028 club options on Garrett Whitlock. The rest of the Red Sox bullpen is kind of meh after Whitlock and Chapman. So like I said, I still think Seattle has more to offer if they do a Miller plus Brash package. That would be my ideal package. Miller and Brash as your headliner, and you would throw in a couple more prospects in that situation. So if you want, if we want to do that, we can look at the board. Fangraphs has their own prospect thing, and we will do 2025 update because it's going to take all season for them to do their 2026 report. And then Seattle, of course, their top prospect list is a lot different than MLB Pipeline, so it still has Harry Ford on there. This thing. So if the Diamondbacks wanted to throw in prospects in the Marte deal, I think you're looking at Luke Stevenson and Ty Pete as the throw-in prospects. Maybe they try to pull Ryan Sloan out of there. And of course, Sloan's rated a lot higher on MLB Pipeline. I think he's their top pitching prospect. It's going to be hard for them to pull Cade Anderson, even though Anderson should be a fast mover. It's going to be a tough pull. Maybe they pull Celestin, who looks blocked. When Cole Emerson, I don't buy the 2026-7 ETA. I think he's a 2026 ETA. Emerson should be in the major league sooner rather than later, if they wanted to go that route. So Celestin would be a throw in the trade, even though Fangraphs does have him in the top 100 and a 50 future value. Great on him. So again, Seattle, I think, matches up the best of the teams that are tangentially linked to Ketel Marte. And if Seattle does want to pull the trigger on a deal, I could see that happening. So moving on, next to the next topic, a little bit of a fun little thing here. The Diamondbacks, according to John Gambadoro, had some interest in a few Asian pitchers, and that's what he wrote. That's what he tweeted. A few Asian pitchers. Players, not pitchers. Players. Although I wouldn't. So Munetaka Murakami signed with the Chicago White Sox on a 2-year, $34 million deal. And that's a deal I'm kind of glad the Diamondbacks kind of stayed away from. Even with a weak first base free agent market, because you're looking at taking a flyer on Rhys Hoskins is your best option. Or you're doing a Pavin Smith, Paul Goldschmidt platoon. That is plan B, if you wanted to shore up first base in free agency. Now, of course, another situation to go through, I wrote about that in the Murakami article that I put on Heavy.com. They could look at Ryan Mountcastle. Mountcastle is a guy listed as a possible trade candidate last year, and the Orioles will be more motivated to move Mountcastle this offseason because simply they don't have a place for him. They can't option to the minors without his consent. He's at 5 years of service time. Exactly. So with that in mind, they got to find something for him. And Mountcastle is a buy low candidate, in my opinion. There is some good quality contact metrics in, you look at Mountcastle's StatCast profile. So quality contact metrics, when he makes contact, which is increasingly less each year, but I digress. Mountcastle has good barrel rate, 74th percentile, hard hit rate, which is 95 plus exit velocity, 75th percentile, launch angle sweet spot, 80th percentile, and then of course the bat speed's in the 89th percentile. So he still has a fast bat, and he does damage when he connects. The problem is he doesn't connect a lot. He's got really bad plate discipline. Chase, whiff, strikeout, and walk rates are in the bottom 10%, bottom 10th% on StatCast. So you have a free swinger that when he connects with the ball, hits it very well. Problem is he doesn't hit very well very often because he's a free swinger and he swings at anything close to the strike zone. And you look at the pitch run values in 2025. There wasn't a lot of red. 4-seam fastballs and sliders were the only two pitch types that he saw a lot of that were above 0. And those were +1. So I do wonder, in the case of Mountcastle, the Diamondbacks could use him as a stopgap option in the same sense they use for Naylor, although he will not cost nearly as much because the Orioles don't really hold a lot of leverage, because unless they want to make Mountcastle their DH, and I don't think they do, you're not going to put a guy that had a 250, 286, 367 slash line, although I think he underperformed a little bit. So a free swinging slugger that hasn't really hit the long ball of late, I don't think they're going to make him the DH, especially when they just spent a lot of assets and money to add some right-hand power to their lineup. Taylor Ward was another big off-season pickup for them as well. In the outfield, kind of split time in the outfield and the DH. You also have Tyler O'Neill, who they signed to a 3-year deal last off-season. There's not a lot of at-bats for Mountcastle. So for the Diamondbacks, you try and swoop in and take Mountcastle as a buy-low stopgap option to guard against any setbacks in Tyler Locklear's recovery from shoulder and elbow surgery. Thanks to Lawler getting him killed. So you have a guard against that. Mountcastle gives you a little bit more upside than Paul Goldschmidt as a potential starting option. I think Goldschmidt should only be considered as a short side first base / DH platoon option. If the Diamondbacks decide to go with Pavin Smith at first base, then I'm fine with them bringing back Goldschmidt to complete the platoon. But short of that, there's no reason to sign Paul Goldschmidt, in my opinion. As an everyday first baseman, no. I'd rather take a gamble on Mountcastle. Even with as weak a track record against right-hand pitching over the last 3 years as Goldschmidt. So like I said, the Diamondbacks have a lot of work to do at first base. Of course, the first decision is deciding what they're going to do with Smith. Is he a first baseman or a DH? And if he's a DH, what are they going to do with Adrian Del Castillo? Other than the fact Del Castillo has 2 options remaining. So they don't have to make a decision on him necessarily. So first base, I think we'll do a more comprehensive review at first base, although it kind of gave the gist of what they might do in the offseason at the position. So those are the options. And to close out this episode of the D-Backs Under Review podcast, we'll talk about what we've accomplished in 2025. So things didn't necessarily work out on other publications. I started the D-Backs Under Review newsletter. It wasn't called that at the time. I didn't stick with that name until I decided to write for it this year. I think I originally named it Mike's Hardball Talk, but that's a pretty bad publication name if you're only covering one team. And maybe I'll do something that's more generic baseball focused. Let's make sure this thing takes off first before I branch out into other projects. But anyways, talking about D-Backs in Review, we look at 2025 in general. We went from 61 subscribers to the newsletter when I decided I had enough of writing for the SI site in 2025. So we went from 61 to 163. That's a gain of 102, and we still have room to add more. The newsletter will come out sometime this week as well. And then from a YouTube standpoint, we started the D-Backs Under Review YouTube channel 3 months ago at the end of September with the idea of uploading Arizona Fall League clips to that, which we did. There's plenty of that. We have a playlist for all the Arizona Fall League interviews. You can find that. It doesn't take much effort. You go to the channel and look for playlists. There's only 2 playlists. You have the Arizona Fall League stuff and this podcast is the 2. And since we started this podcast, the first episode airing on December 9th, when talking about the Michael Soroka signing, we've aired, this is the 8th episode we aired twice a week every Monday, Friday now. We're working on a consistent schedule. Well, now hopefully to try and create expectations as to when you'll see content. And I'm hoping with more consistency, we adds more subscribers and watch time over the year. So when we adding this podcast, and we can look at the analytics behind that on the browser. So we went from 20 subscribers at the end of the Arizona Fall League, or up to 44 at the time of the recording of this episode. We're hoping to get more, as I said. Subscribing to the D-Backs Under Review YouTube channel is the best way to get the podcast content without worrying about whether or not YouTube's going to put it in front of your face. Like I said, there is a special way to find. It is easier to find subscriber content, the content that you're subscribed to, and as I said. And then, of course, if you keep watching the D-Backs Under Review podcast, other content, other video content on this YouTube channel will be increasingly shown in your direction. Because that's just how the algorithm works. You're trying to train your audience to watch your videos, basically, and the algorithm kind of just signal boosts, and they look for other YouTube, I guess you could say YouTube consumers that watch similar content, and they recommend it to that. That's kind of just how it works. And it's not an exact science, obviously. You can do things that make it better or worse. And in my case, I've certainly done things that I've done a lot worse. If you've ever seen my previous podcast, which no longer exists because I deleted the channel, the Snakes on Diamond podcast as well. So it still exists, I believe, on Apple. So if you ever wanted to listen to that archive. But of course, that's pretty much the status report. Like I said, the next episode will air on January 2nd, most likely. So this will be the last episode of 2025. Thanks everyone for watching. Like I said, if you enjoyed the content, the best thing you can do is click that subscribe button. We want to increase the non-subscriber watch time, decrease it down to Ryan Nelson's fastball usage. I think we're at 77% of the recording of this video. We want to get it down to 60%. Let's get to a 60-40 split. We want it to be at a split where we're gaining new viewers, but we're converting viewers into subscribers. And of course, to increase the likelihood this gets pushed out there, show your engagement with the video, like the video, comment down below who you want the Diamondbacks on the Diamondbacks in 2025. Would you prefer Ketel Marte, or would you prefer Alex Bregman, plus whatever the Diamondbacks can get on the pitching side in a Ketel Marte trade? Let us know. And thanks for watching.